Hey y'all! For those that aren't familiar with the last time I made a video like this, when I refer to niche but permanent ways to break your account, I will be talking specifically about permanent upgrades, like talent levels, traces, and Eidolons, that can actually end up sabotaging your performance in specific situations. Big disclaimer that, as always, these types of situations shouldn't concern 99.9% of players. Though I'd also bet at the same time that 99.9% of you have done at least one of the things mentioned in this video. After all, some of these upgrades are on some pretty commonly owned meta-defining characters. And who better to start on than Luocha? Okay, it's not 2023 anymore, I know, but the negative interaction on Luocha's E2 is probably the most meta-relevant out of everything that's going to be mentioned on this list. Adding a shield to a character who passively heals so much that the only time he should be using his skill is on HP drained characters who actively want to lose health is just really baffling design. I guess it's a 1.0 Eidolon for you. Not to mention that Luocha's E2 only adds a shield to allies above 50% max HP, which means that this does not activate on his emergency skill, nor on allies who have low enough HP to actually justify manually using a skill on. In theory, this extra shield was probably meant to cover for Luocha's overhealing, or even potentially provide some built-in protection against large burst attacks, especially considering how Luocha is pretty squishy as an attack scaler himself. However, in practice, one of Luocha's biggest strengths was his SP positivity, discouraging manual use of his skill on allies above 50% max HP. And the only times where you really want to skill spam is on HP drained teams, who would consume HP instead of skill points. But as we already discussed, providing shields to a team that benefits from HP loss really sucks. It's not like Hoyo isn't aware of this negative interaction either. The Blood Flame bond in Currency Wars is built around HP drainers, and they solve the shielding problem by converting any instance of shield gain into healing instead. Just a shame that this was never ported over to the actual game for the very few of you that have E2 Luocha. But yeah, if you're thinking about purchasing Luocha in the Golden Companion Spirit Shop for, I don't know, whatever reason, I'd argue that this is an absolutely valid reason to not get his E2. The rest of the issues on this list can more or less be worked around, but until Luocha gets a Nova Flare that fixes this interaction, if you're actually thinking about vertical investment on him for some reason, I would hold off on this Eidolon. Well, technically attack inflation is so high nowadays that the tiny E2 shield on Luocha's manual skill shouldn't matter, is what I would say if his shields weren't stronger than Danhong BT Soul Dragon shields. Still enough to easily break through, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely enough to affect certain HP loss characters' thresholds. Speaking of such thresholds though, let's look at Mydei. Ever since its release, Mydei has had a bit of an awkward relationship with healing. On one hand, more healing means more HP drain from his skill, but on the other hand, it puts him further away from death, and thus further away from a new HP bar. As such, it's possible to heal too much, as well as build too much max HP, such that Mydei barely misses out on his revive, and is forced to lose only 1 HP from the next attack, instead of like 2000, gutting his charge. This is where we come to his ult. Since the healing on his ult actually scales with level, there are actually cases where a lower level ult can be better since the healing keeps you in one-shot range and allows you to revive where a max level ult wouldn't. However, unless you're someone like Nuko and have enough foresight to plan out Mydei charge rotations down to the exact charge point, I wouldn't worry about this for 3 reasons. 1, the actual gain in healing, while potentially significant, isn't all that huge. The scaling goes from 15% max HP from level 1 to 20% max HP at level 10. Meaning at most, a 12k HP Mydei is healing about 5% more max HP, or about 600 from a maxed ult. While 600 HP is certainly enough to make a difference sometimes, it can also work for you in the other direction, since remember, more current HP means more HP loss from his skill, which diminishes the amount of charge you're actually losing even in the worst case scenarios. Not to mention that the trade-off usually isn't worth it compared to 2, the loss of damage from the ult itself. Going from 96% max HP to the main target and 60% to the sides, to 160% max HP on main and 100% on the sides is usually more important for pushing for damage anyways. Especially with HP inflation showing no signs of stopping, every single bit of extra damage, especially on your weaker attacks, can help prevent you from wasting your big nukes on an enemy with 0.1% health left. And of course, 3. Cyrene exists. While charge generation still does matter for optimal Mydei gameplay, don't get me wrong, Mydei gets so many free Godslayer be gods from her, and with a 200% crit damage boost each time no less, that you just straight up don't care about as regular actions nor Godslayers as much than you used to. Who cares about potentially delaying one Godslayer to Mydei's next turn when you can easily generate 4 or more from Cyrene alone in a single cycle? And while we're on the topic of turn delay, let's talk about a funny turn-skipping interaction with Hyacine's E2 and Action Advancers. While the 30% team-wide speed boost on Hyacine's E2 is basically permanent with her S1, since it refreshes every time she skills her ults, there are actually cases, much like with Bronya's E2, where the speed buff can still fall off, specifically with turn doublers Bronya and Sunday. See, the E2 speed buff lasts for 2 turns per character, ticking down at the start of that character's turn, meaning that if anyone takes 2 turns back to back without receiving any Hyacine heals, they will lose that 30% speed buff until Hyacine takes her turn again. This really only comes into play with turn doublers though, since they can deplete the 2 turn speed buffs instantly while still keeping it due to only having taken 1 turn themselves. This leads to the usual DPS support DPS rotation being desynced if you like to run them at -1 speed to their DPS, as is common practice with these units. And considering that Hyacine likes to operate at around 200 speed before the boost, it's pretty hard to ensure that she can always act immediately afterwards to refresh the speed buff, as that would require a 200 speed Bronya or Sunday as well as the DPS in turn. And with no innate speed buffs and low base speeds on the supports, yeah, forget about it. However, you can simply just circumvent this by running a slower Bronya or Sunday. Shooting for 104 to 105 speed instead of 134 to 135 speed on them completely removes this issue, even if it means seeing a noticeable gap between your DPS and your turn doubler sometimes. And well, let's address the elephant in the room. Most Hyacine teams do not run Bronya, ever. And if you're running Sunday on an E2 Hyacine team, you might as well just advance Hyacine herself and let her do the damage. And since she heals every time she acts, no need to worry about speed desyncs either. To be honest though, I'd expect no less from the queen of the most famous wheelchair comp, truly the best DPS of all time. But of course, what is a DPS without their support? And similarly, what is the OG version 3 wheelchair comp without E1 Tribbie? You might be surprised to see her on this list, but Tribbie's E1, yes, the Eidolon hailed as the most broken in the game at several points, has a very notable interaction that can make it a pain in the rear to play around in certain comps, namely that the damage and thus the kill from the E1's true damage is counted as Tribbie's. Not only does this mean that she can very easily end up stealing kill energy from your DPS, but she can also, more importantly, lock out kill-gated mechanics, the most relevant of which is, of course, Seele. Granted, kill energy can sometimes not matter to Seele, given how you can't ult during her extra turns, which often leads her overcapping on energy, but of course, Tribbie stealing her kills means no extra turns via her resurgence mechanic in the first place. It's a pretty tragic situation for Seele specifically to be in, especially since they had the chance to address this during her Nova Flare, and even did with another Hunt unit around the same time period. Ashvale gains Gluttony whenever his follow-up attack results in a kill, regardless of who actually earns kill credit. A simple wording change like this would do a lot to alleviate Seele's damage management, especially since it's not just E1 Tribbie who can steal her kills. Robin, who is now free in the shop, and thus more accessible, also has the potential to steal Seele's kill energy with her additional ult damage procs. And Ceridra, who is very often Seele's best in slot, and even more so with the added extra skill per turn on Seele's Nova Flare, also has the same additional damage procs on her talent. Granted, they are much weaker than Robin, so you usually won't killsteal with them, but surely they could have thought of fixing this minor annoyance while simultaneously improving the Ceridra-Seele synergy as well, as releasing a kill-reliant Hunt unit immediately before an Ashvale. Like, look at how strong Seele performs in Currency Wars without having to worry about her kills being stolen by her best in slot supports. good luck claiming Tribbie's carrying her damage when her additional damage procs in E1 don't need to go off in the first place, thanks to her execute mechanic preventing such sad cases. Though maybe this is intentional and they're doing this in order to prevent reverse power creep. Who knows? But of course, Seele has always had that problem. It's not like they would introduce new problems to fix for a unit as a result of their Nova Flare, right? Okay, I know Jingliu exists, but strangely enough, this isn't about her this time. Even though her Nova Flare completely changes her teams and barely did anything to actually increase her meta viability, at least unlocking her traces and Eidolons didn't ever really punish you by implementing some backwards new mechanic. And this is where Firefly's Nova Flare comes in. Not a statement to her overall power level, of course, that's out of the question, but I'm not really sure why they chose to try and lower her speed requirements in the form of delaying her combustion state by 10% per break, because it really complicates her optimal speed tuning depending on how many enemies there are per wave. In fact, without Fugue, if there are 2 or less enemies in Memory of Chaos's Wave 1, you're guaranteed to have the combustion state delay proc at least once in Wave 2, and thus push it outside of the 0 cycle. This holds true even with Fugue if we ever get one enemy MOC Wave 1s, though thankfully to my knowledge this has never happened. Let me know in the comments if that's ever been the case though. The reason this delay is important is that it loses you an unenhanced skill in the 0 cycle, which means that you might actually gain more effective damage had you left her A2 trace specifically unactivated compared to if you had her fully built. Granted, it also does mean you lose out on 30.3% break effect and 2 speed from the trace itself, and all the minor traces it blocks off, but still the math should work out such that an E0 Nova Fly specifically can lose a tiny bit of damage within her normal rotation. It also can suck for Apocalyptic Shadow if you're counting on exiting and re-entering combustion state to help you break, since this game counts clears by AV, and so delaying that by a whopping 43 action value can be kinda sus. Of course, you could just aim to clear before that's a problem, but not everyone has that kind of investment or is willing to run sustainless. So yeah. Luckily, it's not nearly as bad in Pure Fiction and Anomaly Arbitration since you lose like 1 enhanced skill after the 2nd cycle, so don't worry if you didn't have the foresight to see 2 version patches ahead and specifically leave her former off-element toughness trace unactivated in order to have a conditionally higher frequency acting but weaker damage per screenshot Firefly in today's day and age. I kinda just wanted to complain about the awkwardness of this action delay implementation if I'm being honest. Hopefully they don't add it in some future characters kit without properly planning around it, because it is a bit of a nuisance to optimize at the moment. Now, finally, onto the real reason I made this video in the first place. Fun fact, by the way, for those that don't follow leaks, Currency Wars gave us almost entirely early full access to Evanesia's kit, and her signature Lycone info was actually covered by none other than PomPom GPT. And now, with early access out, we can officially confirm that Evanesia converts Certified Banger equal to half of the Certified Banger gained, as well as lost from all allies. This means that unlocking Yao Guang's A6 trace, which extends her Certified Banger by 1 turn, actually ends up delaying Eva's own Certified Banger gain by the same amount of time. Not only does this stall her ramp-up time, but since Certified Banger gain is also converted 1-to-1 with energy gain in her case specifically, not just damage like with everyone else, this also stalls how fast she can use her next ult. And what's worse is that Evanesia's E2 actually makes the delay feel even more pronounced, since the gain from other allies gaining Certified Banger is doubled, while the gain from other allies losing Certified Banger is tripled. This would be a bit more acceptable if we had good substitutes for Yao Guang, but, well, A, look at how EMC turned out as pretty much a strict downgrade from her. B, even still, you'd rather just run both Yao Guang and Elation MC together at the current moment. And C, unless you want to huff Mega Copium on Mortonak's Blade, there have been no upcoming Elation supports to suggest Yao is leaving the team anytime soon. Now, all of that said, does this mean that you can't play Evanesia optimally anymore? Probably not. Certified Banger has extremely fast diminishing returns, especially with how fast Eva herself can stack it, so you aren't losing much damage. In fact, since Guang does still do a decent bit of damage herself, especially if built with a crit DPS, which her S1 massively helps with, having her keep Certified Banger for a turn longer also helps. And also, in order to maintain being A6 traceless, you lose out on 5.3 crit rate, 4 speed, and 6% elation, or in total, 10% elation for Yao herself, and by extension, 2% elation for everyone else. And while I'm sure there are certain rotations that benefit from front-loading Yao Certified Banger transfer to Eva, there are also rotations that would benefit from delaying the Sid transfer. Since Evanescia is allowed to be fast thanks to her lack of dependence on attack percent multipliers allowing her to run speed boots, and the benefit of more personal speed also boosting Aha's speed, for example. With Certified Banger only lasting 2 turns, and Eva possibly taking many more, even in a time as short as a 0-cycle context, timing exactly when she gets her steroids can be pretty important, even without considering a potential turn spam build. And sometimes you'll want that boost later than sooner. Do I still think it sucks that you're essentially forced to play the delay game if you did the textbook correct thing and already maxed all of Yao's traces? Yeah. Is it actually a big deal most of the time? Honestly, probably not. Maxing out the Herta's traces prevents her from using Poet's full 4-piece effect for the 32 crit rate. And yet, even with that prior knowledge, 99.9% of the Herta runs nowadays just run Scholar anyways. Just goes to show that just because you're cut off from certain playstyle choices, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Nevertheless, even though it isn't a big deal most of the time, I do still find it frustrating that these changes are in fact permanent, and that there is still no way to toggle on and off traces and Eidolons in game yet. Like, we can toggle on and off Nova Flares if you want to debuff Seela again for some reason, so the technology is there, and we also have Starward mode coming out soon, so there's clearly a demand for higher challenges that Hoyo wants to address. So why then are these character upgrades fixed? Especially when it leads to annoying situations like with E2 Luocha in particular, for example. It really doesn't make sense to me. Can't we just add challenge to our game by nerfing our characters instead of buffing playable content, please? Optionally at that? Or at the very least be able to do both with take-backsies? And yes, I know it's technically the industry standard to have dupe upgrades be unremovable, but like, Hoyo is a standard. They could easily change things if they wanted to. Is it just them not wanting their whale player base to be in touch with their more free-to-play friendly side? Like, why is this still around? Like, it's affecting creator experience servers for goodness' sake. Otherwise, I genuinely have no clue if it's not any of these things. Anyways, let me know if I missed any perma-brick interactions, quote-unquote, like these in the comments. Big or small, or heck, it doesn't even have to be strictly meta-related. Have a good day!